Hey, what's up everyone, it's Justin here, and today I've got the review for you of the OnePlus X, a smartphone I was really excited about when I first saw its announcement. Of course, I was trying to get my hands on an invite to buy it, but during that time, OnePlus kindly sent me out a review unit to check out. And the master budget smartphone makers are back at it with their second smartphone release of the year, and with the OnePlus 2 being dubbed a flagship killer, I think it's safe to call the OnePlus X a budget killer, as it is by far the best smartphone I've tested out at the $250 range. When I first heard about the OnePlus X, I literally couldn't believe that a smartphone built like this has great specs and just the total package was available at this price point. With budget smartphones, there's usually trade-offs that are expected, whether it may come in the build quality, the camera, or the speakers for example, and sometimes even the display. But the OnePlus X is by far the phone with the least trade-offs I've experienced to date. In fact, I actually enjoyed my experience with the OnePlus X more than I did with the flagship OnePlus 2, which will set you back $140 more. When it comes to the specs, you've got a Snapdragon 801 processor that is clocked in at 2.3 GHz and is quad-core, paired up with an Adreno 330 GPU, 3GB of RAM, and 16 gigs of internal storage. This smartphone is also expandable up to 128 gigs, and if you decide not to use the expandable storage slot, you can also use it as a dual SIM smartphone. So let's talk about the hardware. The smartphone may seem a little bit small compared to many other the Android smartphones out in the market right now, but I actually think it is the best universal size. The device measures in at 14 centimeters tall, almost 7 centimeters wide, and 6.9 millimeters thick. And with pretty small hands, you could see it fits in my hand perfectly, and it is pretty much the size of my iPhone 6, which is currently my daily driver. The device itself is also beautifully constructed out of glass front and back, and you can just see it looks so clean and so sharp. I'm usually not the biggest fan of black smartphones, but I think this looks awesome. And although it may be a huge fingerprint magnet and you probably don't want to drop this thing, OnePlus has also conveniently included a silicone case to protect your beautiful OnePlus X. In addition to the glass front and back, the sides of the device is also constructed out of metal, so at $250, this smartphone doesn't have a single piece of plastic in sight. And that's pretty impressive and awesome in my opinion. It feels extremely high quality and great in the hand, but I think it looks amazing as well. So huge props to OnePlus in every aspect of this design. On the bottom you'll also find a micro USB port, which was somewhat surprising considering its bigger brother has a USB-C port. I sort of expected to find a USB-C port on the OnePlus X as well, but I actually prefer micro USB for now. On the left side you've got your alert slider, which conveniently allows you to adjust your notifications really quickly, and you remember I love this feature on the OnePlus 2. And on the right side, you do have your sleep wake button and your volume rockers, which I have to say I often get confused between each other, so I would have liked it if one of the buttons was on the other side. Moving on to the display, the OnePlus X features a 5-inch 1080p 441 ppi active matrix OLED display. This display looks great in my opinion, and it definitely stacks up with some of the flagship smartphones that have stuck with 1080p displays this year. For a 5-inch display, 1080p is totally acceptable, and it still has a really respectable PPI of 441. It is really sharp when you look at it, and one thing I really noticed is that the blacks are really deep, as you can see here, and that is great. With the device being completely black, it just makes it a really immersive experience when watching videos, for example. It was also noticeably vibrant, and the colors did really pop out at the screen. I really have no complaints whatsoever about the display on the OnePlus X. So just to wrap up on some of the basic hardware of the OnePlus X, you may know by now that this is a really standard phone, but they have really nailed it in every category. The build quality and construction is great, the design is great, and the phone itself just looks and works very simply. But of course at $250 you're missing some of the premium features such as a fingerprint sensor, but that really isn't a deal breaker by any means. When it comes to the software, you're running Android Lollipop with the Oxygen OS 2.0, and from the OnePlus 2 I really enjoyed Oxygen OS. It is pretty much like stock Android. Really simple, really clean, and pretty much exemplifies stock Android for the most part. I found the OnePlus X to be noticeably snappy, and it is a really fast phone. I didn't notice any lag whatsoever or any stutters here and there, which I actually did experience in the OnePlus 2 a couple times, but that could be because of an early version of Oxygen OS. The drawer to the left side is really handy, showing your recently used apps. And on the OnePlus X, you can also enable something called dark mode, which actually saves the battery life of the smartphone, but with the black glass face, I think it looks really good with it. You'll notice this in the settings and the app drawer where it just blacks out the background. As you can see here, it is pretty much like stock Android, though you do have a few more aspects of customizations that you will not find on stock. And as we know with OnePlus, they like to give you choice. You have the option to use the on-screen buttons or the touch capacitive buttons. I decided to use the touch capacitive buttons since the display is 5 inches and I kind of wanted to use every inch of that, but I do wish that the buttons were illuminated. Giving you guys a quick glance at the camera app, this is also very simple. You've got your shutter button, the camera switch, a quick timer, as well as some quick settings including the beauty, HDR, and clear image mode. But other than that, you slide in from your left side and that will give you your different modes, whether it is photo, video, or panorama. What I would have liked with this camera app is a quicker way to switch between video and photo mode. I found it a little bit finicky at times to have to slide in from the left, but that was just kind of my complaint about that software. One pretty cool trick that the OnePlus X has up its sleeve is FM radio, and that is built into the device. So if you don't have any connectivity whatsoever, you could still listen to the radio, and all you have to do is go to the OnePlus radio app, plug in a set of headphones, and you're good to go. Just like that, you're able to tune into your local radio stations. When it came to the gaming experience, I had no issues with this as well. The Adreno 330 GPU and 3 gigs of RAM just handles all this graphics performance no problem. The way the device looks and how it's really simple and just blacked out makes it a very immersive experience, as I noticed once again when gaming. On the back, you'll find a 13 megapixel rear-facing camera with an f2.2 aperture and an 8 megapixel front-facing camera with an f2.4 aperture. It records at 1080p resolution on the back and 720p recording on the front. The photos that the OnePlus X produced were pretty impressive at its price point and blew any other smartphone near the $200 range out of the water from what I've tested. It did a very good job in balancing the colors, and for the most part it focused quite easily. So as you can see from these camera samples, if you're someone who takes a lot of photos, I'm sure you won't be disappointed. The front-facing camera, on the other hand, seemed a little bit over-processed, and the colors were not as good as they could have been. When it comes to the 1080p video test though, I wasn't really impressed at all. I tried my best to keep my hands as stable as possible, and while I was recording it seemed to look okay on screen, but after I took a look at the video footage, you could see that it is just so shaky and the clip itself just isn't pleasant to look at all. The colors also seemed reasonably off and everything was a little bit dark, and there's a ton of motion blur and moire you may notice from the video samples as well. So although the photos turned out very nicely, the front-facing camera and video samples were quite underwhelming. When it comes to the battery life of the OnePlus X, that was pretty decent as well. I was able to get through about one day plus about a third of the day after, and with the 2525 mAh battery, that is really respectable for a device of this size, but by no means is it a marathoner. I personally had dark mode enabled, and I think you should too, as not only does it look great, but it supposedly does save the battery life as well, due to the display not having to power as many pixels. Of course, you also have the option to use battery saver, which is pretty much the same battery saver mode as stock Android, where it turns off the animations, throttles the GPU and CPU a little bit, but it still enables you to use all of the capabilities of your smartphone, so it isn't an ultra power saving mode. So at this point of the video, you may notice that the OnePlus X really doesn't have that many trade-offs. The camera is mediocre and could be better, I guess, but pretty much every other aspect of this smartphone is amazing. But we've kind of got to the point of the video where I found a trade-off of the OnePlus X, and this isn't just the OnePlus X, but many smartphone manufacturers have seemingly cheaped out on these speakers. The speakers on this phone though were kind of worse in my opinion than most of the other already bad smartphone speakers I had tested out this year. They were pretty tinny as soon as you got over about 60% in the volume, but if there was anything good to say about them is that they get pretty loud, though I don't suggest you go there at all. So this pretty much wraps it up for my review of the OnePlus X, and as you can tell, I love this smartphone. Just everything about it is so great, and I'd even go as far as to say if this thing was 400 bucks, I'd still want it. The fact that the device was so well built, looks so beautiful and clean on the back in its Onyx color variant, didn't have a single bit of plastic on it, was already beyond what I expected out of any smartphone in this price range, paired up with a beautiful display that looks really good, and a nice responsive Oxygen OS that complements it, and also a camera that wasn't amazing but was already ahead of any other smartphone in this price range. And the fact that you've even got FM radio built in and the dual SIM capability. You could tell I adore this smartphone, and even if I was to review it as a flagship, priced at a flagship smartphone, it would still be a pretty damn good phone in my eyes. Of course, with OnePlus, it is an invite-only system, and I know you guys all hate it, but don't worry, the invite system is only for 1 month. And after that month, they will go on sale weekly in 1-hour intervals. You should also follow me on Twitter at JTechApple, as I will be tweeting out invites if I start to receive them. But I couldn't thank OnePlus enough for giving me the opportunity to check out this smartphone, and just some last words, it completely blew past my expectations that I naturally set with a smartphone at this price point. I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and if you did, be sure to hit that like button as it helps the channel out a bunch, and I'll see you all in the next one.